Alright, so we left off with these. When you are solving these quadratic inequalities, you start out like it's a quadratic equation, meaning you have to set it equal to 0 and do box. Okay, it's not a 1x squared, so we can't do the shortcut, we have to do the full box. So if I multiply those things, multiply to a negative 12, and they add to negative 11. So what would that be? So then we factor, we get 3x and 1, x minus 4. Okay, from here, what I have you do? We set each of those things equal to 0. Just like we were solving a quadratic equation. So we subtract our 1, divide, we get a negative 1/3. Over here we add our 4, we get a positive 4. Those are the two things that make it equal to 0. I need to find out when it is greater than 0. You cannot just say x is greater than negative 1/3 and x is greater than 4. Because with an inequality, if it could be true if both of those things were greater than 0, a positive times a positive is positive, but a negative times a negative is also positive. So to get all of our answers, we drew a little picture. We plotted these two numbers, small to large. So the negative 1/3 on the left, 4 on the right. And then we just drew a rough sketch. We know 3x squared, that's a parabola. It's a positive 3, so it opens up. So what I was doing Friday is just drawing a rough parabola like that. Those are the two times when it hits the axis. So we work from here. We wanted when it was greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, is it above or below the axis? Above. Greater than 0 is positive. So I want these sections of my graph. So we write an interval for each. This one, we go left to right when we write our interval notation. This is going forever in the negative direction. So remember, we call that negative infinity. Infinities always get a parenthesis. Comma. Stops at negative 1/3. It was not equal to. So that just gets a parenthesis. If there's more than one piece like this, we put a capital U in the middle. That's a union. This one starts at 4 and goes forever in the positive direction. So on these quadratic inequalities, you will either have one answer, just the little piece in between the two, like if this had been a less than, my answer would have been negative 1/3 to 4, or it'll be the two ends, if I want the greater than. Questions there? The last piece of this section. So Friday we did the regular inequalities and we did the quadratics. The final piece, these are rational inequalities. They have a fraction in them. Okay, a a rational inequality is going to be somewhat like a quadratic inequality in that we have to get everything on one side first. So I am going to first subtract over my 1. Now, we had problems on our last test where we had to talk about getting common denominators and getting rid of fractions. If I had put this question on your test, you probably, if I had said equal to, you would have just multiplied the x plus 4 over. We can't do that in the inequality because do you know if x plus 4 is positive or negative? No. And if you multiply by a negative, it flips the inequality. So we can never multiply by a variable. Instead, our strategy is to get everything on one side and turn it into a single fraction. So 1 is the same as 1 over 1. To get these to be a single fraction, we need a common denominator. So I am going to take it times x plus 4 on top and bottom. That's legal. I didn't multiply by an x on each side of the inequality, just the top and bottom of a fraction. So I'm not changing my problem. Once these things have the same denominator, we can combine them into a single fraction. What should I do with this subtraction? Just like having a negative in front of a parenthesis, what do you do with it? Distribute. So I'm going to make this a plus and then run a negative through the top of that fraction. So now when I put these together, the denominator doesn't change. I have a negative x 5 plus negative 4 is positive 1. Alright, we're in pretty good shape here. We have a single fraction and we have 0 on the other side. So now I need to find, just like in the quadratic we found what made each parenthesis 0, I want to know what makes the top and bottom equal 0. So that would be a positive 1 and a negative 4. From here, there are a couple different approaches. I have found that people prefer to look at the graphs. The graphs of these, it's not like a quadratic where it's always a parabola. So get out your graphing calculator or open it up on your Chromebook if you don't have one, and let's take a look at this graph. I want to graph the negative x plus 1 over x plus 4. So you have to use parentheses. Everybody remembers how to go to your y equals and plug that in? And when I look at my graph, maybe, looks like mine kind of froze here. Okay. you get something like this. The -4 and the 1 are the places where my graph either A, hits the x-axis, which is what happens at 1, or B, it doesn't exist. It's a vertical asymptote, which is what happens at the -4. What I need to know is, was my graph positive or negative in each of these sections? So before the -4, my graph was below the x-axis. So that section was positive or negative? Negative. Okay, between the -4 and the 1, that's this piece up here, my graph is positive. After the 1 is where it hits the axis, and then it's just down underneath that x-axis, so it is negative again. Okay, these will not always alternate. Most of the time they will, but if I had like an x-1 squared, then it won't alternate. So you can get 2 positives or 2 negatives in a row. We wanted greater than 0, which means positive. So I want this section of the graph. We said equal to. Equal to means bracket, but if I put a bracket on both of those, I'm wrong. Does anyone know why? If you look at the very original, what can x not equal? -4, because you can't get a 0 on the bottom. On these rational ones, no matter what, the denominator always has a parenthesis, because you can't get 0 on the bottom of a fraction. So our answer is parenthesis, -4, 1, and the 1 has a bracket. Okay, so those are a little more involved. We have to get the common denominator, make one fraction, and the graphs, we have to look at those a little more closely. Do you have any questions there? Try some more. First step is what? Okay. Need everything on one side, so bring our 4 over. That's like a 4/1. We have to make a single fraction, so what do I need to multiply it by? On top and bottom. Then what do we do? We have a subtraction, so we need to. So 6 plus 12 is 18, minus 4x over x minus 3. So we need to know what makes top and bottom equal 0. And we have a 3. And then 9/2. Now what do we do? Look at the graph. You are graphing this final fraction that we have. Okay, so make sure you put parentheses around the top and bottom. Okay, so we see 3 and 9/2, or 4.5, are the two breaking points. So before my 3, my graph was negative. After my 3, positive, and then after my 9/2, it went negative again. So we have negative, positive, negative. Alright, I asked for greater than, so I wanted the positives. Equal to means bracket, but what can x not be? 3. So the 3 gets a parenthesis, the 9/2 gets a bracket. Let's do one more. I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to see how far you can get on your own before we work it out. So you subtract over your 5, it's like a 5 over 1. To get a common denominator, you multiply by 3x plus 4 on top and bottom. Distribute your negative. So we get a negative 13x minus 21, where 3x plus 4 is less than 0. So some uglier fractions, but not a big deal. You have to know it makes top and bottom equal 0, so if you can't tell, work it out. So you get a negative 21 over 13 and a negative 4/3. Which one is smaller? If you don't know, what do you do to determine which one's smaller? Yeah, convert them to a decimal if you need to. I don't want your answer to be written as a decimal because I want exact, but if you need to help you, you can. Negative 21 over 13, that's like negative 1.6, so it's smaller, it goes on the left. Negative 4/3, that's negative 1.3. So then we graph, and we are graphing this final inequality that we had, our final fraction. So we can see this graph starts out negative, and then it goes positive, and then it drops back down. So we have a negative, positive, negative again. did I want positives or negatives? Less than 0 means negative. If it's less than, do I have to worry about brackets at all? No, it's strictly parentheses, so you go left to right. So it's coming from negative infinity, comma, negative 21/13. Put your u in the middle, negative 4/3, comma, infinity. Are there any questions on that? Then that's all I have for you guys. Friday, I assigned the first half of that assignment. Did everybody get that? Just from video or the assignment tracker if you need to look there. So today I'm assigning 7 new problems. You guys will, I am not giving. So this top was what I gave Friday. Then this is today's portion. We will turn it all in. Well, the other group will be turned in tomorrow. You guys will turn in when I see you again on Thursday.